Let's just start, and we'll give a few minutes before the presentation actually begins. So, hello everyone. On behalf of the Michigan chapter of ASEI, we welcome you to the Getting Real with Engineering webinar series. In these times of lockdown, or maybe a partial lockdown now, we thought of unlocking the world of knowledge by bringing these webinars to you so that you could attend it from the comfort of your home or office maybe. So before we proceed with the webinar, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. You do know that we'll mute everybody during the presentation so that we can avoid any background noise that comes in between. So do not struggle to unmute yourself, please. We would also love to have your comments and questions, but in order to have an uninterrupted presentation, we would request you to put the questions in the chat portion of the screen at any time during the presentation or right after. We will be monitoring the chat and will pose the questions to our speaker at the end of the presentation. Depending on the time that's there, we might ask you to take your questions offline. That is, if there are plenty of questions. Also, just for you to know, today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be able to share a link with you sometime later this week on our website. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with all your colleagues. I see that we have a few people still left to be logged on, like they are in the process. So we'll give them a minute or two before we get started. In the meantime, let me tell you a little about ASEI. ASEI is the American Society of Engineers of Indian Origin, an organization of engineers and technical profession, of course, from the Indian origin. It was established in 1983 in Michigan and is a non-profit organization. Since its inception, ASEI has strived to institute a channel of communication between the technical organization within United States and abroad. It's also lent a helping hand to all the charitable organizations, and it also provides assistance to engineering students at local and national levels. Of course, networking events are a vital part of our society, like our engineering society. Moving on to our webinar, which is about leading your R&D and product development organization through the COVID-19 crisis, which is very relevant at this time, like all of you know. COVID-19 has affected communities in multiple continents, and solving this health challenge is everyone's priority. As implications for COVID-19 unfold, product development and R&D leaders have to lead their organizations to ensure employee safety, stabilize operations, and eventually preserve cash. In parallel, product development teams should start planning ahead for the new normal. To give us a deeper insight on the subject, we have with us Akshay Desai, who is an associate partner, McKinsey & Company. Akshay has exclusively worked with clients in automotive, aerospace, and defense, and has specific expertise in R&D excellence. He will be joined by his colleague, Balaji Iyer, who is a partner in the Detroit office, and who has extensively worked with clients in automotive, agriculture, and industrials machinery space. And he has specific expertise in product development. So we pass on the buck to Akshay and Balaji. Go for it, Akshay.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for the introduction. And yeah, Akshay Desai here. I spent almost all my time in R&D and product development. I've been working almost exclusively in automotive and in aerospace. Primarily what I do is, larger scale R&D transformations, and excited to talk through kind of the new developments there are a lot of changes in the last 6 months, as we all can relate to. Excited to talk to how these have affected not only businesses but specifically R&D. And I'll also introduce and turn it over to Balaji, a partner from the Detroit office. Again, worked with me in many of these cases in R&D transformations as well as in product development, who's going to walk us through some of the introduction to what our take is on the COVID-19 crisis and how this is unfolding from an economic perspective.
Hey, thank you, Akshay. Hi, good evening, all. Hope everyone is safe and family are safe. I'm a partner in the McKinsey office, predominantly worked across India and the US. Have the privilege of serving clients across the geographies, including Germany, Japan, and having learned from some of the industry leaders as well and able to contribute meaningfully to some of them. Very excited to be part of a webinar with ASEI, engineer by background, but took a devious turn and went into management consulting. Good to be back with engineers who are doing engineering work. I will spend about 10 to 12 minutes walking through the initial part of the document and the story, and then we'll hand over to Akshay. Before we jump into content, we just want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is sort of first and foremost a humanitarian challenge. All the conversations we would have, while we'll have an economic tinge to it, we acknowledge that it's humanitarian. Sort of all efforts that every company is placing and every government is placing is to sort of protect both lives and livelihoods. Akshay, can you go to the next slide? So the way we are structuring the webinar today is we will spend a good 2-3 slides on the broader economic impact of COVID and how we see scenarios unfolding. And then specifically we'll cover into the R&D product development context on 3 topics across portfolio optimization, digital solutions, and agile R&D. We will start with the economic impact of COVID. As you all know, there is no one right answer when it comes to the economic recovery here. Sort of McKinsey Global Institute, working along with a bunch of us, we have modeled about 9 potential scenarios that could come out. Broadly, 2 parameters that really matter to the recovery. One is how quickly and how robustly the virus spread will be controlled. We are still sort of not in a space where we can confidently say that everything is under control. The second axis, which is the x-axis, you will see how is the economic policy response and how the knock-on effects happen. So there are a bunch of scenarios we can model around this based on the past learnings we have. If you broadly look at it, you would have heard these terms multiple times. There is a V-shaped recovery, there is a U-shaped recovery, there is a zigzag U. So there are fancy terms we can associate with it, but broadly, if you look at the anchor model is what I would call the A1, which is, I would say, 50-50. Like the virus is controlled regionally, but has some recurrence regionally. There is sufficient economic response and policy response. That would mean a recovery that takes anywhere between 2 to 3 years to come out. On the top right, you see, which is a classic V shape, which somehow magically the virus disappears and pretty much every economy in the world is able to provide a stimulus that meets the requirements of the economy. Yeah. So there are a wide range of scenarios. The key is uncertainty is there to stay, and none of us can put a finger and say this one scenario will win over another. Going to the next page, what we did was we discussed these scenarios with a bunch of executives across the world, around 2,000 to 2,500 people. And we asked them how are they feeling about the economy and the recovery. The good thing that you notice is the way to read the chart is there are 2 numbers on each square. The left-hand side number is a survey we did in early April. The right-hand side number is the survey we did in mid-May, early May, sorry. The good thing you notice is the broader pessimism is reducing. Yeah, people are getting increasingly optimistic as you see the numbers from the left declining, and more people are now into the middle buckets, which is A1 and A3. Yeah, so roughly half the executives surveyed believe that the response will be, I would say, around the median expectations. There are a very few number of people who are super optimistic as well. For example, like the A4 has also declined from 6 to 4%. Yeah? So it's not like pessimism is moving to significant optimism. I would say pessimism is going towards optimism. And that's something important to keep in mind as companies make resilience scenarios, how much weightage you want to give to a very positive scenario versus a very negative scenario. At least the broad consensus we are picking up is people are more optimistic than pessimistic with a measured optimism. Next page, Akshay. The underlying, the math behind all of those curves is a sectoral prediction. And here you see how different sectors could react. A1 is the middle scenario. If you take automotive, for example, here, sort of this year will still be in the red in the A1 scenario. That's what people are thinking. Auto will take a good 2 to 3 years to recover back to pre-COVID levels. Versus if the belief is on A3, which is more a U-shaped recovery, then sort of end of the year will be where we were in pre-COVID. So that's the range between 0 to, let's say, minus 15 kind of percent is where people are anchoring around for automotive. The hope is it's much better than these scenarios, but from a management expectation point of view, where you want to put some numbers and business cases, people would be factoring anywhere between a flat to a minus 15% decline. Most of it already seen it in your plans coming up. There are some sectors which will be relatively protected, like a food kind of stuff. There'll be some sectors which take a slightly slower decline, like semiconductor. So you will see all sorts of mixes depending on the underlying sectoral dynamics. Like, for example, I was talking to some of my clients, and they said this is the best May they ever had in their 30, 40 year work life, because the demand is just gone through the roof for some of the products. And these are manufacturing oriented products. So it's not like every company is facing the crisis. Yes, there are sectors which are facing the crisis a bit more than some sectors. Next page, Akshay. So what does this all mean? Yes, there is crisis. Yes, there is uncertainty. Yes, there are multiple scenarios. How are companies reacting to it? Again, we did a survey around end April with about 70, 80 people. Broadly, what we are hearing is pretty much every company is acting. And when I say acting, in terms of COVID-related responses, in terms of money and cash preservation. Yeah, everyone is acting in terms of employee safety and health. That's a given. What are the themes that we are seeing people acting upon? Pretty much straightforward. Any new investments are getting curtailed, which leads to slowdowns in refreshes, slowdowns in new launches, especially on the passenger car side. This is a very delicate balance on how much do you invest in ACES versus how much do you invest in ICE, and the pushes and pulls. So there's a big investment theme that's going on. Second, as you would have observed in your own companies and your own sectors, a significant focus on overhead optimization. I would call it the non-critical expenditure optimization. Overhead is a pretty tough word. But companies are not stopping there. Companies are looking at multiple avenues. There are a couple of things where people are looking at business portfolio adjustments. There are also people who are looking at increasing partnerships, especially for capital orientation. So there are a broad spectrum of responses that companies are doing while they are thinking about the crisis and the recovery. Next page, Akshay. Coming to specific to R&D, the discussion is around 40% of the companies have already decided to cut back on R&D. about 30 has decided not to cut back on R&D. So there are a good mix of companies in terms of R&D expenditure. When we look at the past recessions across multiple years, the one thing that stood out was the world R&D to GDP ratio did not change much. So while companies reduce the spending to match with the revenues and expectations of margins, we have not seen a knee-jerk, abrupt stopping of R&D across the world. Now, of the 40% people who have decided to cut back on R&D, about half of them are sort of cutting more than 20%. Yeah, so that's the number we are seeing. Around 20% is the budget cut that companies are thinking. There are companies who are thinking less than 20 as well. That's the spectrum you see. About 40% is between 11 and 20%. About 40% is between 20 and 30%. Yeah. So yes, 40% companies looking at a budget cut of about 20%. And sort of the other characterization of this R&D cut is many companies do not see reductions in ASS R&D. I'm sure all of you know ASS. I just sort of expanded for the benefit of others. Automation, connected vehicles, electrified vehicles, and autonomous, connected, electrified, and shared. Those are the technologies where we believe investments will continue. Next page, Akshay. So far we heard about the crisis, the recovery, the multiple scenarios, how the world is turning towards more moderately optimistic. In spite of that, people are planning some investment cuts, overhead cuts, and R&D cuts. We will specifically see sort of 3 double clicks today. One is on portfolio planning. How does the portfolio evolve? Second is on the digital in R&D, the solutions and what will it take to embed digital. And third is how organizations are becoming more agile. We look at this in a sort of 5-step framework. First one is what we call resolve, which is you have to sort of safeguard the employees and you have to protect the operations. Then resolve will slowly move towards resilience, which is how do you ensure that people, when they are in the crisis, how do they manage their own work? How do they manage the needs of the organization? How does the organization manage the needs and cash? Then we also think companies will start thinking about the return, which many companies have started thinking. Some companies have already enacted on it. Then sort of it moves into what we call the reimagination, which is what is the new normal that people would like to imbibe on. And the last is what we call reform, how people use the learnings that they have faced in the crisis and reform the R&D organization for the future. I will stop with one big example that I have seen across in my life. When one of the downturns happened, and sort of some of the subsectors are usually cyclical in nature, like commercial vehicles, industrial machinery. So the demand dip is not new for them. So they have how to react kind of playbook. In one of the downturns, I saw a client basically embark on a significant effort. They said we will use the crisis of demand decline and take out 10% cost out of our products. So they compromised all the new R&D spending budget into idea validation and execution. And that set up the company extremely well when the demand came back. There were clients who basically said, we use this time to redefine the product development process and stage gating process so that when the demand picks up again, customizations can be done much faster. There was a client who basically said the break-even point has to come down by 50%. And they used the downtime in production to completely retool their lines and sort of outsource manufacturing. And they were readying themselves for the future. So a bunch of these, there are examples where in every downturn, you will find clients and companies who invest for the future. So that is a crisis. That is green shoots of recovery. There are some cuts that people are talking about, but there are actions that people take as well, which will help them set up for the future. Over to you, Akshay. You can walk the group through the next 3 points.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Balaji. And just to re-echo, what we opened with, right? First and foremost, this is certainly a humanitarian crisis. Excited to speak to you about it here, but certainly that's the lens that we're taking on this. And there will be, certain changes that happen in R&D. Again, it's the humanitarian piece, and then we'll walk through some of these major changes that we're seeing on portfolio, digital, and agile. First, we'll start out on the portfolio piece, and so to expand upon these 5 steps, right? There's a couple major events that we're seeing on portfolio rationalization. One, we're seeing the critical projects being safeguarded while limiting expenses. So leaner teams, but making sure that there's no delivery milestones or schedule increases on existing product launches. The other one we're seeing is really adapting the product portfolio to supply constraints. So one of the big things that we're seeing outside of R&D, obviously, is supply chain and the supply chain challenges that many companies have seen. So, with products that are primarily driven by, regions affected by COVID or were affected by COVID but have since recovered, we're seeing big shifts away from those products that are heavily dependent on, tier 1s, tier 2s out of China. And then for the go forward, the plan ahead, we're seeing this broader adoption of, scenario-based portfolio planning, which we'll get into further details, to really ensure that there's profitability going forward. There's a significant effort on looking at, low ROI or, more innovative or more long-ranging topics and portfolio pieces to really make significant cuts and to enable, the cash front as well as the long-term sustainability. The final piece is in launching products. So this is almost that forward-looking view of portfolio rationalization, of not just looking at what you have today in your market basket, but looking for how you evaluate future projects and future programs. We're seeing a pretty big emphasis there on, launching new products, launching products that meet the new market demands and shifting market demands as a result of COVID. And certainly, we're seeing that in automotive. We're seeing that, much more heavily on other areas like, temporary services and logistics services that are more heavily impacted by COVID. One of the big reasons that we're seeing a lot of these shifts and kind of the driving factor for what we're seeing in portfolio rationalization is really uncertainty. And nobody really knows how the next few months are going to play out, and certainly on the next year scale. But what we're seeing is a couple major areas of uncertainty that are driving these changes. One is the obvious, right? Financial pressure. So we're seeing companies being quite cash strapped and quite focused on reducing their near-term expenditures. Primarily because sales have dropped. And a lot of the folks in this call are in automotive. We're seeing that across the board with, shutdowns, almost a stopgap in sales in the last few months. So that's one of the big factors. The other big factor is economic recovery, right? And we're seeing massive slowdowns in certain sectors. Tourism and travel is obviously one of them. But there's many others that, have really had the economic fallout and are causing significant programs to be cut or canceled. Then the third one we're seeing is regulatory impact. And this is where it gets kind of interesting from automotive perspective. We're seeing this more in Europe than in the United States, but certainly changes in regulations, emissions are actually, potentially being pushed out or delayed, which has a huge impact on the product portfolio. So if you're releasing, new products, for example, one of my clients is in engines, diesel particulate filters, gas particulate filters are big in the market right now. And if you're releasing these products that are timed to regulations, your product portfolio is going to change should those regulations be postponed or delayed. Customer preference is one of the other areas. We're seeing a big change in that. Obviously, the grocery delivery example that's on the page is an obvious example of shifting customer demand. But one of the other areas that we're seeing is, even in automotive, a shift in sales, right, in automotive vehicles. And this is different than the previous instances where, it was quite tied to oil prices. But we are seeing a shift in customer preference and projects and programs being canceled as a result. The final one is operations and supply chain. And, I hinted at this earlier with, more COVID-affected regions, right? If your tier 1s, tier 2s are coming from these areas, your supply chain is going to be quite heavily impacted. We are seeing that, kind of almost filter down, right, to the programs that are heavily dependent on products that are coming from areas that are, shut down or having factory shutdowns in as a result of COVID. And what we'd recommend and kind of how we'd recommend addressing the product portfolio is to have an iterative approach. So in many cases, companies are continuously running these iterative cycles on refining their programs and portfolios. What we're seeing is across the board, there's almost a multi-step process of looking at the starting position, understanding what your current programs look like, the ROIs on those programs, updating your revenue forecasts, and really getting a sense of what your outlook looks like based on what's happening with COVID. And then the second piece is developing scenarios of what you think could happen. Now we covered 9-box scenarios at the beginning of the presentation, but there's certainly a lot of impacts that can have on your portfolio mix. So understanding with the strategy, with finance, and looking at the revenue forecast, what are the couple of scenarios that can play out over the next few months? And what will that affect your product portfolio mix? How will that change your revenues? How will that change your overall company position? And then we're seeing the third step is just to really evaluate the portfolio against these scenarios. So, what are the key decisions that you'll make? What are the if-thens, so to speak, on which programs you continue, which programs you delay, which programs you cancel based on the different scenarios that unfold? And then finally, executing, right, of hey, we're going to, put our eggs in these 5 baskets and more heavily invest in certain areas, and then we're, taper back our investments in other areas. And we're seeing that happen at an iterative rate, right? So as the situation unfolds, right now, I live in Houston, we're seeing a huge uprise in Texas, or the situation changes on a month-by-month basis. So we're seeing this being quite an iterative model and necessary to really capture the accurate scenarios. Then this kind of page outlines, I know there's a lot of bar charts here, but it outlines what we're seeing at a high level in terms of the portfolio. And so you look from left to right, the current budget or pre-crisis budget, most companies are looking at a pretty significant cost down as a result of the low sales and other factors. How you would meet that is a couple of steps. So one, you'd have obsolete projects. So in the world of automotive, there's a lot of programs right now that are being canceled, pushed out, especially product launches being pushed out. These are programs that are not necessarily obsolete, but certainly not something that we need to invest R&D on if the dates have moved out. That's in the dark blue bar in cancel obsolete projects. But then you have a swath of new opportunities that come up, and so you end up with this laundry list of projects, many of which are high value, some of which are medium, et cetera. And with different risk assessments. And so, as you move into dissecting these long list of projects, it's critical to look at, the programs that are weaker with the current scenarios and with the current market on COVID, ones that are, still relevant and just potentially delayed or pushed out several months. And then there's, the baseline of programs that are critical, right? Critical cornerstones to your business, things that a company can't really do without. And so for a lot of our auto tier ones in the Southeast Michigan area, truck platforms and the classic American truck platforms would be something that is quite critical. In this case, programs are examples of weak and relevant. Just a couple examples that I've seen right now is I'm serving a powertrain provider. They're looking at cutting programs that are currently delivering to high-performance vehicles, so AMG and certain low-volume high-performance vehicles. Is that something that they want to invest in the next 6 to 8 months? Is that something that we expect sales to go up for 2020 or drastically go down? And so we're seeing kind of the reallocation of investments across core versus ancillary programs. And then the final piece in the light blue is really the operationalization of these changes. So how you look at no regret projects versus dependent projects, how you really make those changes and make the cuts that are necessary to the weak or projects that are slated for cancellation, as well as the projects that are relevant but currently delayed. This is an interesting page and certainly interesting visual. There are a couple major steps that we see, and let me pause here and explain what the visual is. Essentially, this is almost a graphical view of an element of costed BOM across an entire company's portfolio. So when we open a company's portfolio, look at all the costed BOMs and the part numbers, we see commonalities tied to platforms, We see, commonalities or relationships across platforms who are using the same components, say fasteners or off-the-shelf parts. And all of these relationships are the lines, and the dots are the specific parts. And so what we're seeing with the product portfolio is a couple major things. One is, on the demand side, we're seeing, customer demands shifting, and entire programs or entire platforms are being deprioritized. And that's the platform A you see in the top left. We're also seeing, areas on the supply side where there are, constraints from geographic reasons, from reasons because of COVID, that are limiting certain variants of a platform, but not killing the platform in itself. And then finally, we're seeing, what we're calling soft optimization. And so, there's optimization opportunities in complexity. How can you reduce your footprint on a given platform? How can you leverage off-the-shelf parts in a greater way, whether it's brackets and fasteners or even up to larger components? How can you drive that? And how can you drive that in analytics-based fashion? So we're all kind of used to sitting and platform engineering, looking across different portfolio groups, especially in automotive, where you have, doors on a vehicle might be locked down across your entire vehicle range. But we're seeing that being used in a more analytical sense. Can we look at, down to the different individual fasteners? Can we look at up to brackets and stamped components? Can we go all the way to PCBAs and LCDs? Like what components and what's the limitation of what we can do in terms of having parts that are applicable across multiple platforms? Now, this page outlines, a result of a poll, right? So, we've done this seminar a couple of times with various folks in the R&D organization and various R&D leaders. We asked folks to say, hey, what are the key top of mind principles that you're seeing with COVID? And, two of the ones that come out as the most striking are reducing the product portfolio size and reallocating the budget. And for many reasons, right, that we've shared, these are the two biggest things that are on the mind of, most R&D budget managers or R&D leaders. There's also, an emphasis on modularity, common platforms, increasing modularity, decreasing SKUs. There's also a, refocusing on industries and regions. And there's a small group, that are not planning to modify the R&D strategy. But I think the survey is quite telling, right, in that, most of the companies that we're seeing, automotive and elsewhere, are actually, taking quite big steps to decrease their portfolio size and really put their investment dollars, which are increasingly getting limited, into the higher dollar programs. The next big piece is on digital. So we talked through, portfolio rationalization. Digital is getting increasingly important, right? And as we're sitting, most of us are working remote, if not all of us. There's this growing fear, or was a growing fear, of how engineering processes, workflows, anything from DFMEAs to team collaboration, how is that going to work in a remote world? And we see that digital R&D is going to be one of the biggest enablers for that. And so jumping right into the content, this is a little bit of the obvious page, right? We're seeing huge increases for digital tools across VPNs, across video conferencing, even cloud storage and remote solutions. So nothing unusual here on this page, but this is what we're seeing across the board on increasing remote usage. And what we're seeing on remote usage and how you can use digital is a couple main things to drive success. One is really to know what the pain points are, to know what you're solving for and really prioritize those elements. Second is to look at the timescales, right? Of what can be done in the short term, what can be implemented quickly, versus what needs to be implemented over a long term or will require more of an IT investment. Second is piloting and getting these out quickly as quickly as possible. So really focusing your efforts and your areas on digital. With groups that are going to adopt it faster. So, quickly starting on these pilots with these rapid groups or younger groups, and then scaling up towards groups that are, potentially more tenured, but also potentially, higher risk, right? Your larger programs, your more core programs to your R&D. And then, the key thing here is cross-sharing, right? Especially in a lot of these organizations, when you're remote, instead of sitting in one building together, there's a huge amount of value in cross-sharing successful examples, whether it's use of Slack, whether it's use of Jira or various other digital solutions, to really emphasize, hey, this worked for me in these two cases, and these are the limitations of that tool. I think finally is building a digital roadmap, and this is really the longer term goal. Setting ambitions into what the ecosystem will look like, and what the future or new normal state will look like. And this is really important. One of my clients reached out to me just 6 months ago and asked, hey, we're thinking about greater offshoring in R&D, or thinking about greater remote work, and then COVID hit. And so now they're actually really progressing and almost taking advantage a little bit of the situation, in that they're moving forward with their remote plans and outlining how they can move a majority of their engineering offices to a remote working environment. And what are the enablers? How will they be as effective, if not more effective, in a remote environment versus today in a centralized engineering environment? And so I think this is going to be one of the big questions of is there a need for the BMW model of having all of your engineers sitting in one essential building in Munich? Or is there a model where engineering offices are more distributed and you have localized centers of talent, COEs for specific expertise, and almost a more fragmented engineering org without the downside of that fragmentation? Now, there are a lot of tools on this page, so I'll focus on only a couple. So I think the obvious ones are Teams, Zoom, these what we're using right now, right, of presentation tools. Less obvious are tools on project management. Now, a lot of us have used Scrum boards, Obeya rooms, things of that sort. There's lots of tools out there that do that digitally and do that digitally pretty well. Jira is one of them that's listed here. But there's a dozen different solutions that are out there for visual management, workload management, and even project management when you have a 30, 40, 50,000 people developing your product. I think that's one of the big tools. The other big one is decision making, right? And we're seeing a lot of tools crop up in this space on how you rationalize your portfolio, how you use data in a more effective way to make decisions, just because the world's gotten a lot more tight given COVID, and budgets have gotten tight as well. I think the final one, across the board in all these tools, not singling one out or the other, is the heavier use of analytics. And I think that's a vague statement. But what I mean by that is how do you build data science models to either improve quality, either improve system integration, or improve the way your R&D process works. So a couple examples that we're seeing that are picking up more heavily now, certainly popular last year, but due to COVID are almost on fire. One is digital analytics in the warranty space. So how can you decrease your warranty claims? How can you improve your product quality by taking in that data and analyzing and using some advanced analytics and machine learning to understand what is going wrong in your products or your massively complex products? What are the end user behaviors that are driving quality issues that you're seeing? So, I've done this a couple of times in automotive powertrain, where you might have, 10,000, 100,000 different factors that are driving, NVH on your drive axle, or, emissions on your diesel particulate filters. And you want to analyze all those different factors to understand what are the, key markets or key behaviors from your end user that are causing you to have warranty issues, having large pockets of money being spent on a weekly or daily basis to suffice those warranty issues. That's one. Another one that's pretty larger analytics application is working in groups and getting greater efficiency in product design and the design build test cycle. So we're seeing, and we have seen the last 5 to 10 years, an increase of virtualization or digital twin. BMW is one of the leaders in automotive in this, in developing, zero concept vehicles, or having that DBT cycle being done digitally. We're seeing that take off pretty quickly now, primarily because test labs are closed. A lot of my clients that are dynos are actually shut down. So we're seeing this in small pockets with groups like AVL, who are continuing to expand their presence and making digital models. We're also seeing that with OEMs and tier ones, who are integrating these models or developing more complex solutions, for their products that are more integrative, on jumping from directly from design to test in a virtual environment, and then back to design. So the rapid cycles and the rapid DBT cycles are something that drives quite a bit of efficiency. Jumping into Jira, right? Now I'll spend a short amount of time. I know I'm running low on time. This is a tool we've seen applied in a variety of industries, right? Software is its home, and software is where it started, agile software development. But we see this applicable in any kind of project scenario where you're managing multiple workloads, multiple work streams, and dozens, if not hundreds of people. So I think the effectivity is what's most important. I think we've all seen, whether it's Jira, whether it's the classical Obeya room or Scrum management, we've all seen them applied in great ways. We've all seen them applied in less efficient ways. So I think the key thing here is making sure that it fits the organization, fits the application, and that it's being used in an effective way versus a cumbersome or handcuff way. Now, our take on digital R&D, right? There's a couple major big trends. Digital R&D solutions. I've hit on that. There's a huge number of companies in the space jumping into this, and there's no limit to the digital R&D tools that are available. The next thing is the solution ecosystems. Now we've seen this with Salesforce outside of R&D, but what we're seeing on R&D right now is a handful, maybe not a handful, but maybe hundreds of individual companies. How they string these together into a system or system application is going to be really key. How you get data from one system outputs into the other is going to be pretty important from an R&D perspective, where you're using dozens of different tools and how those tools will communicate. So I think that's what we're seeing as the next frontier. The third item is the combination of solutions unlocking performance, and this is performance, whether it's efficiency or in terms of schedule adherence or on-time delivery. We're seeing a significant number of tools in that space that are even customized to the remote environment. The last topic is on Agile, and I know this is a topic that's come up for the last 20, 25 years. Agile in software has been pretty huge. Agile in R&D has come up and faded every once in a while. We're seeing this come up in a big way as a result of the COVID crisis. We're seeing in the short term, selective Agile methods and specific learnings, and specifically tailored to the work from home, right? Of how you can be quick and on your feet as a team without being in the team room or in the discussion room when you're discussing a DFMEA or a quality concern. The other thing on planning ahead is going forward, the Agile operating model on how you refine your structure, especially given the new normal. We're seeing that come in, and it plays a big role in the portfolio rationalization piece. So if you're changing your products on a month-by-month basis, you're looking at your product portfolio, the changing markets. You need to have Agile teams to be able to support and change direction as needed. So we're surveying our engineering clients on a routine basis, and we're seeing a wide variety of responses in terms of remote work. What we're seeing is that there's most folks believe that there's more frequent communications and more frequent touch points result in better work products. We're also seeing that lots of people feel that the face time or being in the office together is not as important as one would have believed a year ago or 2 years ago. I think the other thing that is pretty critical from this survey was concerns that drag on for days, several days or weeks. Right, we're seeing significant problems that will be resolved through multiple team meetings or multiple days, stretch into longer terms in the work from home environment. So a couple of thoughts on remote work. A couple of thoughts that we have on adopting agility, right? So most of the value that we see in agility and most of the kind of the gains that we see are not things from deploying an agile work environment or having something roll out in a large transformative way. But they're actually small things, right, that you can do on a day-by-day basis with your current teams. And they're simple things like adopting a common meeting rhythm, common and standard agendas, looking at team norms and making sure team norms are adhered, especially when the line between work and life is pretty blurred. Looking at morale and bonding in a remote fashion, which is increasingly difficult. Coaching and feedback, having a pretty decisive and fast coaching and feedback model. And then contact time, and this ties to the survey results that you saw previously, increasing the contact time despite the fact that everyone's remote and on back-to-back meetings or 30-minute increments of meetings. The last two are on visual management and data hygiene. these are quite important, especially as you're moving faster, and if you want to move faster, making sure the patches of code that you're passing along or the ANSYS designs that you're passing along are actually a single source of truth versus multiple files and confusion on the data storage sites. So I think one of the big things that we're seeing in agile organizations, and some of the big successful examples, right, are the ability to reorient, and this is increasingly important, as I mentioned, when you're changing your product portfolio and your markets are changing. The other one is autonomous operation, and this is what's key, right? And if you have these large engineering functional groups, say thermodynamics engineering, you want to make sure that on a day-to-day basis you don't need leadership intervention. You don't need a push on here are your top 10 priorities or here are your 5 major programs. That needs to be a little bit more autonomous, given the touch points and the face time will be reduced. The third major thing is ambiguity, right? And this ties to the first point on reorienting, making sure that folks are more comfortable with a greater sense of ambiguity, given the markets and your portfolio is changing. Making sure that there is a rapid cycle of test, learning, and then redesign is also really key to being agile and dealing with ambiguous situations. I think the final one is rhythm and rituals, and this is what I think is on the bottom of the page, but certainly almost one of the top or most important things. I think a lot of companies, especially in R&D cultures, are suffering or are challenged by the lack of the workplace culture and by the lack of the workplace norms. And this is one of the big reasons why, as an R&D specialist, most of you are in Southeast Michigan and automotive, know that getting talent and getting the right talent is one of the key challenges. This last fourth item is what's one of the big drivers in getting the right talent and getting the right company culture. So we're seeing this come up in a pretty hard way with new hires, with rotation programs, with some of your engineers who are in the 0 to 5 year tenure range, where the company culture and the company culture that they join is actually disappearing or changing or hard to feel in a remote environment. And then, what we're seeing is a couple major trademarks, and I'm going to go through this really quickly because I know I'm over time. But strategy, looking at product vision and strategy, making sure your archetypes and your all the way down from your platforms down to your individual research programs are actually aligned. The second is structure, having these multidisciplinary teams. So, most of you are probably in a matrix organization, function and programs, making sure you have team setups that are, flexible, yet, allow you to develop, whether it's a functional skill set or, a product line or product manager skill set. The third one is in process, right? And this is the frequency of interaction. This is the frequency of feedback. This is team structure, making sure that process is and the hygiene associated with it is clean. The last two are people and technology, and I'm grouping these together for a reason. I think the people, the technology, and the ownership of the deliverables are pretty intrinsically tied. How you can manage the technology and the digital capabilities, as I mentioned in the earlier section, to enhance your people and the ability to deliver on R&D programs. That's going to be increasingly important in the remote environment as well as in an agile and uncertain environment. Now, we'll close out here. We also surveyed in terms of efficiency drops and how people are feeling, the new normal and how they're affecting it in terms of R&D. The sum here isn't to 100% because multiple, people will select multiple choices. But what we're seeing pretty clearly is there's a focus in agile. There's a focus in piloting. There's a strong interest in the agile environment. But what we're not seeing is a significant efficiency drop. And this is what I hinted at earlier was, there was a lot of fear, maybe 4 or 6 months ago of working remote and having an efficiency drop as a result. We're not seeing that as much. So, certainly there's a push on digital and agile, and I think it's going to be deployed in, various ways, right, of decentralized R&D models, allowing folks to specialize and develop COEs, less emphasis on the BMW model of centralized engineering and housing everyone in one specific location. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the new normal, especially in R&D and in the footprint and offshoring, outsourcing. So we'll close there. We have a couple of deep dives, and I know over time, a couple of deep dives right on post-crisis recovery, as well as product portfolios in the new normal, and then agile and R&D, and goes beyond software and agile. But would love to open it up to questions from the group and hear your thoughts about the presentation too.
Thank you, Akshay and Balaji, for sharing your insight on the R&D and product development at this juncture of what we are facing. So we have several questions that have been submitted by the audience. So I'll quickly go through it. The first one is by Piyush Malik. He's the Silicon Valley president of ACI chapter. He said that it seems to be a study from McKinsey, the slides. What's the sample size and geographic implications of that?
Yeah, so the individual surveys have different sample sizes, anywhere from 30 to 60 folks. Primarily, it's leaders in the R&D organizations worldwide. I think 80% of the surveys and the information is coming from 2 geographies, so either the U.S., North America, or Europe. There is a large sector in Asia as well as South America and Africa, but I would say 80% of the insights and the surveyed folks coming from Europe or America.
Yeah. Just actually, I'll just add one point. The initial set of work you saw on the COVID recovery part of it, that is around 2,000 people, executives across the world. The charts you saw specific to product development, where McKinsey led the work, as Akshay said, anywhere between 40 to 80 kind of participants. We also sort of leverage some of the published information from Harvard and stuff like that. Mostly we'll have the source in the slides, and N should be there. If it is not there, can check. But directionally, these will be statistically relevant numbers.
Got it. Now, he also asks, is there a chart showing the impact of post-COVID R&D investments by industry?
I would love to have that chart ready today. We are not yet in post-COVID. Okay. I can look back at it, Piyush, if it is extremely critical. But what we have heard anecdotally is any industry which has a consumer angle and a consumer behavior angle, they are increasing R&D, including stuff like vitamins and nutrients. Any product that has not so much relevance in the COVID scenario, we are seeing a decline in R&D. No, we don't have a point of view on what will be the new normal in R&D spending by industry. We do not have it ready right now.
Thanks for clarifying that, Balaji. And this is very interesting. I'm also in the same management consulting field for the last 30 years, and I have seen a lot of clients behaving differently, and these trends cannot be generalized. There are things which are specific to specific industry. So I know you took some examples from automotive, which is perhaps bulk of the attendees on today's call, but definitely I'm very keen to understand the impact of R&D on both hardware, software, essentially high-tech and communication field. So if you have any numbers or anything, any material as a follow-up, please let us know. And of course, we would love to get both of you involved as ASCI members and have McKinsey on board as ASCI corporate sponsor as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Vatsala, you're on mute.
Absolutely. Perfectly said, Piyush. Jwalant, who's our national president of ASCI, he said, he commented on very informative presentation. Can you please comment on how does unemployment rate for engineers in US compare with people in other fields?
Jwalant, if you keep the broad labor force in question, then it's pretty low, because bulk of the hit were taken by skill sets that were rapidly sort of scalable. Engineers were sufficiently protected there. However, if the crisis deepens and if it deepens significantly with limited side of recovery, then there will be hit on engineers as well in larger scale.
Yeah, and to add to Balaji's
point,
point, I think we're going to see slightly different scenarios depending on the industry and the geography. Despite the push for remote work, there's certain areas that are heavily there's certain areas that are concentrated in terms of specific talents, whether it's systems engineering or automotive, and there's certain areas that are a little bit more talent deserts, so to speak. So I think we're going to see a pretty big variation, geography by geography, as well as industry by industry.
Yeah, and Jwalant, if you're trying to predict or create some triggers, there are a couple of triggers that matter. One is the extent of government support to protect jobs. There are economies where government is sort of giving sufficient support to keep 40-60% of the pay scale up and running. So that kind of de-risks the organizations a bit. Then there are cultures where sort of people as a society believe that let everyone take the hit rather than few people, so that you see sort of willing salary cuts of 10-15% everyone takes, so that people are not fired from the organization. So you can see some elements of culture, some elements of government support, and some elements of skill set redundancy. That's where you will see the impact of engineers losing jobs.
Great. Krish asks, are there ROI information available for this?
ROI on the digital tools?
I would think so.
Yeah, and the ROI on the investment. Obviously, a lot of tools had to be brought to do all of this, correct?
Yeah. So well said, Krish. The lens we as sort of McKinsey takes along with people we work together is what we call use case by use case. We never recommend digitization for the sake of digitization. I mean, it should solve a problem the organization has. And as Akshay laid out, there will be a couple of things which you will sort of yourself call as no regret. Like, for example, like a Teams or a Skype or a Zoom or a WebEx. In this context, there's no need of a business case to be made. So pretty much there is broad alignment in the leadership and you know the real value, you just go ahead. So there'll be not more than 3-4 solutions, which everyone will accept that it's needed. Then you will have a list of 10 to 15 solutions where you will have a push and pull. Some people want it, some people don't want it. That's where you will put a bunch of business cases. There will be like 100 solutions where like 2 people will want it and 200 people will not want it. So those you'll naturally prune down. Directionally, Krish, most of these investments break even much faster if you are putting a time to market benefit or a productivity and sort of more, as long as the growth in outputs give you a much better ROI than reduction in costs.
Great.
Thank you.
Deval Desai, who's our advisor to, asks Akshay and Balaji, how do you see digital R&D enhancing concurrent engineering and further enhancing time compression? So
yeah, I think Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just repeating the question. I think you got it.
Yeah, I think two examples that I think I see in the industry right now is one is on the use of analytics to drive quality, product quality, and reductions in warranty expenses. And then two, one of the big changes I see is the use of digital twin and the implementation of moving to virtual design build test. I think both of those are pretty dependent on not only the agile, rapid cycle times, but also the use of digital tools and building on the prior question, right, is which tools to use, what the ROI is of these tools, how these tools are structured, whether you go with an outside provider or whether you use internally. Those are the really big questions. But directionally, those are the two trends that I'm seeing in the industry so far.
And to add one point, Akshay, there, Mr. Deval, if the objective is time compression, then the interventions you do will have to drive concurrent, or will have to compress the timelines of one of the processes involved. Like, for example, like target costing, if you take as a critical step of any new product development, can completely be automated now. Like you don't need people spending time back and forth. So concurrency can be driven by a faster talking to people, but also by solutions which give you the answer without having sort of a human involvement and back and forth. So both solutions are sort of running in parallel.
Sure. Rakesh asks, organizations, especially automotive, should they invest more in R&D and balance by cutting some the areas like marketing? What is your take on it? Or should they use this time more in innovations?
That's a silver bullet question. Go ahead, Balaji.
No, exactly. If the answer is known, it'll be like the holy grail. At least the way I've seen some of sort of the clients I respect a lot react to it. Sort of they never lose sight of the future. Yeah. So you can't say today I need cash, cut everything in R&D. No, that's not going to work together today. So they will keep a 3-5 year lens and say, when I come out of this crisis, how strong should I be? And any investment that's required to keep it strong has to be done. If that is around time to market, then R&D projects which enhance time to market go on. For example, product catalogs, modularity, a bunch of things will go on. If it's a very, very cost sensitive market you're competing, and if there are a couple of platforms where you are not good today, then you'll use the crisis to take cost out of those platforms. Yeah. Very, very company, brand, platform specific decisions should be taken. Directionally, yes, lesser marketing in stuff like automotive, because you don't expect people to come and buy vehicles today just because they see an ad, and invest more in sort of enhancing the value proposition of the company.
And yeah, go ahead, Akshay.
Yeah, agreed. And to build on that, we see industry trends, right, with automotive OEMs that 2 to 5% of their revenues are in R&D versus pharmaceuticals are up at 20 to 25%. So we see these trends. I think we'll expect the trends to continue industry by industry. I think even opening that question a little bit more, what are the other areas that we're seeing outside of R&D? The two big tangential functions to R&D are supply chain and procurement. We're seeing some pretty big moves in those areas because of COVID and because of this, hopefully new normal soon, but current crisis. So those are the two other functions that are quite connected, right, to R&D that we're seeing big changes on in terms of supply base, in terms of rates, in terms of how the negotiations are conducted.
Yep.
So a little tricky, based on your own company perspective, do you think any industry was prepared for this type of incident? And do you think this should now be a part of the all corporate strategies?
Even the industry of coronavirus wouldn't have expected to be so successful in this decimation. So I would say no company that I know of were planning for a couple of months of zero sales or a couple of months of everyone going remote in like 1 day notice or 2 days notice. So whether companies were well set up to succeed, yes, in some elements, definitely yes. Like if you take McKinsey, for example, pretty much everyone had sort of laptops, VPNs, box access. So frankly, it didn't make a big difference to sort of client service during pandemic, because the culture of the organization was to enable remote working. Now there were organizations like Zoom, there were organizations even otherwise who had, they were sort of established for remote support, but never intended to be used during a pandemic. There are companies which sort of had some squacky workarounds to ensure their factories run as usual, especially in regimes like China, where people quickly sort of realized and did a forced lockdown of the company and the company surroundings. So there are companies who put in place structures and systems which helped naturally. There were companies who reacted quickly and put in place solutions to help in the COVID, but I don't think any company sort of systematically planned for a pandemic that would sort of bring us to our knees.
So another interesting question comes up. What are the implications of a startup? And my chat window just went down. What are the implications for a startup? Big players have wherewithal in terms of resources. So financial and human resources. Can you share your comments?
I mean, if the startup is in a cruel industry where jungle raj and people are fighting for survival, then it's a very tough game. Right from cash management to employee satisfaction. Couple of themes I've seen people do. One is sort of compensate employees with more stock options instead of absolute cash, so that employees can survive as well as participate in the future growth whenever that comes. The second theme I've seen is promoters diluting stakes to get in fund infusion. But it's extremely tough. I mean, it's not about startup versus large company. It's about who has cash versus who does not have cash. It doesn't matter how large an institution you are, how big you are, how many years old you are. If you don't have cash in times of crisis, it's going to be tough.
Right.
Or you need a benevolent investor.
Okay. We'll just spend a few more minutes if it's okay with you. There are a couple of questions.
Sure.
Okay. So Kaushik Matras asks, it was mentioned that auto market is supposed to reduce by 20% due to COVID impact. If we assume that second quarter output was 0 due to the plant shutdown, do you think the third and fourth quarter sales in 2020 will be similar to 2019?
I don't think Q2 is going to be 0. It'll be more in the 40% range is what I'm picking up. So like it'll roughly be, let's say 40, 60, 80 kind of range. And these are based on how recovery happened from the past scenario, past recessions for 100 years, how the markets have bounced back.
Yeah, I guess. Go ahead, finish. Sorry.
I don't think it'll be anywhere close to 2019 levels for the next 8 to 12 quarters. You might have an aberration, but no.
Oh, okay. I guess if I can, just like with a simple example, right? Like if you assume, you're making 100 vehicles a year, right? And you have 4 quarters in a year, you sell 25 vehicles every quarter, right? And you do that in 2019. In 2020, second quarter output is 0 or close to 0, right? So there goes your 25%, right? Your 25% output market just vanished, right? Because you didn't produce anything, you didn't sell anything. So second, whatever, even if you say it's not 0, right? It's some. But so does that mean in your modeling, because you projected that 20% reduction, right? So did you model third quarter and fourth quarter 2020 sales would be similar to 2019? I guess how would you get to that 20% number then?
So if you look at the chart, Q2 will be roughly 30% down from the normal. Q3 will be roughly 20% down. Q4 will be roughly 20% down. So it's like the market will be at 80% of 2019 levels.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Probably the last one. Is the initial boost in efficiency expected to stay for a long haul or settle down to a new normal, perhaps even below before work from home, below levels before work from home?
I would see this as 2 buckets. One is the hours worked. Second is the output per hour. Hours worked has definitely increased, and that is not sustainable in many cases. So that will definitely taper down to new normal. I don't think people will be willing to sort of over-invest to try to the crisis, and sort of once the emotional support required from work goes away, you will see declining work. Output per hour, we have heard stories from 40% decline to flat, varying by company, varying by infrastructure constraints. We believe that will be closer to flat, or if not slightly better than flat, as people sort of master the art of remote working. So directly, it should be slightly, I would say, if an organization manages to keep productivity pre-COVID and post-COVID for the next 8 to 12 months at the same level, that'll be good success. Anything after 12 months, you will see a 10+% growth in productivity.
Sure. With that, we'll like to wrap it up. We do have a few more questions, but we can always take that offline. We'll send it to you. Once again, thank you, Akshay and Balaji. That was a very deep insight into COVID, and some kind of extrapolating was also needed from your side. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone who attended today's webinar. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with ASCI, you can go to our website, www.asciusa.org. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of